if you are not deeply engaging with the rising generations, with young people, like your church is gonna die.
Mm-hmm. They're champions for change, and they're champions for good. And when we can harness and empower and equip that, it's excellent.
This is Pod Strangely Warmed, a place where we tell the good Methodist story, where we have conversations that invite followers of Jesus to seek after that loving, just, and free world that God imagines for us all, and have a little fun along the way. Hey, Pod Strangely Warm family, Daniel Hawkins back here in the studio as we continue this series looking at the 5 disruptive trends that Carey Nieuwhof says will potentially dominate the life of the church over the course of 2025. And one of those major trends is the impact of Gen Z in the life of the church, and specifically the way Gen Z is manifesting their spirituality. Nieuwhof claims that it is both in revival and in retreat at the same time. And to help us navigate this conversation and unpack a little bit more about spirituality, Christianity, and Gen Z, we are incredibly thankful to have Chelsea Peddecord and Loni Fancher here in the studio with us today. Thank you both for taking time to be here.
Thanks for asking us.
Thanks for asking us. Glad to be here.
Chelsea, last time you were on the Zoom screen in the background here.
I know. I drove. I left the Dallas bubble.
I know. Thank you so much. Plano is closer than Fort Worth, and so it did help that. I think you are officially the only Zoom participant in Pod Strangely Warmed.
Really?
Look at you.
That feels very youth pastor.
It does feel very youth pastor.
It's a very small claim to fame, but you can take it. You can take it. In a season with no caffeine, every little boost helps, right?
Yeah, Lent's been rough. Day 2.
Day 2. It's all good. Before we get started in the topic, let's help our Horizon Texas Conference community know you guys a little more fully. We asked each of you to bring something that is kind of indicative of you or the work you do on a day-by-day basis, and we've got some amazing special guests on the table. Normally we have self on a shelf, but the shelf was too short.
The shelf was too short and won't move. So,
Loni, what'd you bring?
So this is moderately sized Jesus, who is actually just representative not of actual Jesus, but of big Jesus, who is the 6-foot version of this very thing, who has become a mascot of sorts for our kids and youth ministry at our church. He often goes to our special needs ministry and sits at the table and colors with friends. And our preschool kids love holding his hand while they do things. And he goes to youth camp and mission trip and then has to go in the washing machine because he comes home smelling like... I was about to ask
you, how do you wash him?
I don't.
Does he go to the cleaners?
Well, no, I just hand him to our family minister and let her deal with it because it feels sacrilegious to like hold Jesus under the water in the washing machine to get him right. It feels
it's a different kind of baptism,
right?
Well, I think depending on your type of washer, right, the mechanics of it would feel different, right? If you've got the top loader, you're literally pushing
like shoving Jesus
down
and then
it.
like there's an agitator and all the thing. Yeah, it's weird.
I would have guessed he was dry clean only.
I mean,
but then
maybe,
that's odd.
Maybe he is, and also
someone is tithing so that Jesus can be dry cleaned. It's a funny thought.
It's a weird thought. So no, he just goes in a large capacity washing machine. He also, the big version, we have taken and put a pool noodle up his back and into his head, so he's not quite as floppy. Because a 6-foot Jesus doesn't have any muscle tone at all.
Right.
And so he doesn't sit up as straight as you would want him.
Structure.
Yeah. So we give him some body shaping.
A spine.
Yeah, he's occasionally has to go to the chiropractor and we shuffle what all the stuff that's inside. But yeah, so this is moderately sized Jesus. We also have a lot of now people just bring us. So we have the tiny ones and then a normal doll size.
We have the tiny ones around our building too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I keep wanting to make stickers that say I found Jesus at First UMC and just hide them all over the building and give people rewards for finding them.
That's an excellent idea.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it'd be really funny. Mm-hmm. I might just do it.
Do it.
Why not?
Canva has that quick print option now.
So true.
Next time, let's have 6-foot Jesus.
I didn't bring him today because I wasn't sure how big this studio space was.
See, if I had Zoomed, he could have been in my seat.
Right.
That's
and I was a
true.
little afraid that if it was the size of the Fort Worth office, then I was going to have to sit in his lap or he was going to have to sit in my lap.
That's a weird vibe.
That's a
Fair.
weird vibe.
I don't like it.
Fair. The glorified
discernment.
closet is, a little tight.
It gets a little weird.
Very good.
Anyway, but Chelsea brought this glorious goose.
Yes.
She is glorious.
Tell us more.
I would love to tell you more, and you too. You see, this is Gloria, the goose. She is currently dressed for Mardi Gras or Fat Tuesday for all who celebrate. And this year, our theme, we do a theme every year at our youth group, is Love University. So taking students through what does it mean to love, and really also even looking at it through the Wesleyan way of salvation. How do we be sanctified to really become love and Christian perfection? You get it, right? We're Methodists on this podcast. And so Desi Griffin, our high school pastor, Lonnie knows Desi, he's wonderful, came up with the idea as we were building out Love University of every university needs a mascot. What's it going to be? A dove? That's boring. Desi mentioned he had learned in Celtic Christianity, it is on-gate glass is their understanding of the Holy Spirit. And it looks at the Holy Spirit rather than a peaceful, calm dove as a loud and boisterous, courageous goose. So we gave out stickers. Honk if you love Jesus. Gloria sits at our check-in table. She has seasonally appropriate outfits.
Perfect.
And if you will remove her mask,
Yes.
you will see she has also begun the Lenten season as she was ashed just yesterday.
Very good.
So this is
Well
Gloria.
done, Gloria.
We also, our other high school pastor, Mac Nolden, gave her these beautiful lashes that we find very dignifying.
They are. It really is accentuating her femininity.
I know. I wish we could. Can we get a zoom in?
Right? Like
Good.
gender-affirming goose.
Gender affirming goose.
All right. You can tell we are talking about student ministry today, just based on the non-shelf nature of Gloria the Amazing Goose and mid-sized Jesus.
Just
But
don't make sure. I don't know how well you know youth slang. Just make sure you don't call him mid Jesus.
yeah,
Not
that's
mid-Jesus.
Okay.
very intentionally. That thought went through the head and
Good.
said,
Good.
"No."
I'm so proud of you.
cancel.
Look at
Right.
you being a
Yeah,
dad.
Up with it. Not really. My favorite moment of I preached Glen Lake for winter camp a couple of weeks ago. My favorite moment was Dave Brower's daughter was there, and last year he had preached.
I was going to say,
winter
it's been a
camp.
long time since she's done camp where he wasn't the preacher.
Right, and apparently he decided just to drop all the slang into his sermons in
All at
a
once.
intentionally cringy kind of way.
Right, he did it on purpose. Yeah, it was kind of
he
great.
wasn't trying,
There's an art form to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he wasn't trying to be cool. He was recognizing I am not, but good. But it made her cringe nonetheless. And I asked her about her best, worst, and weirdest camp experiences while at Glen Lake, and she named the best, which was making good friends and worship and serving and all that stuff. And the worst was Dad dropping all the slang, and I could not hold back in that moment. And it was just a little nugget of joy for me and nobody else. But I said, that's pretty sus, isn't it? She looked at me like, oh, dear Jesus, please go away.
Yeah.
And it was the best moment. Well, not the best moment of the weekend, but it was an amazing.
was one of those,
it was one of those kind
Really
of
holy weekend, but that was top.
Yes. So as we talk about Gen Z, right, one of the things that may pop to the surface among those of us who are north of 40, Chelsea, I don't know where you fit in this.
You'll never know.
I'll never know, and that's okay. Is sometimes the thing that catches our attention first is the slang we don't understand.
Right.
But there's a whole lot more going on within the depths of the human beings of Gen Z. And one of the things Nieuwhof says in his Disruptive Trends is that Gen Z is both in revival and in retreat at the same time. I think what he's trying to get out in a very preacher alliterative kind of way, right, is that the spirituality is emerging and changing and shifting, and the ties to the institution are different than they have historically been.
Absolutely.
If you were to kind of capture the essence of Gen Z spirituality and in the life of the church, what would you either push back with what he has said, or where would you affirm?
Gosh, where to even start?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to set up like who Gen Z is. So when we talk about Gen Z, we have two youth pastors here, and that might give you the impression that Gen Z are all teenagers, and that is objectively incorrect.
And Gen Alpha has entered the youth
And
space.
Gen Alpha is entered the youth space. And so Gen Z is basically 14 to 28.
Okay.
So when we talk about Gen Z, we have pastors in our conference that are Gen Z pastors that I am actively watching change the game and change how we do things. So as we have this conversation and we talk about revival and retreat, there is hope.
Yeah.
That they're not all on retreat. Some of them are so on fire that they're changing the institution from within. So
Yeah. I always word it, they're an interesting generation because they do have this deep emotional connection to their faith and to spirituality. I would almost equate it to, for those who are interested of, I think Gen Z really encapsulates a lot of what Christian mysticism
Absolutely.
offers.
Yeah.
And I think for a long time, the more mainline traditions, I grew up non-denom, but closet Southern Baptist, you know?
Okay, sure.
Baptist who can drink.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Baptist who can drink. But
With better
I never
PR.
did that. I was on leadership team.
Sure,
I would have been disqualifying. Anyway, my point is, I think for so long we felt the evangelical movement took hold of that more emotional expression of faith.
Yeah.
And it almost sometimes, if you look back, mainline traditions almost stepped away of that, of like, okay, that's maybe could be who we are, but that's not who we are. And we're the more traditional, we're the more
Structured.
academic, structured part of our faith.
We're going to lean into lectionary and
Yes.
liturgy and
Which is good.
right.
Sure.
What I have found with Gen Z is they want both. They want
Yeah.
to be able to theologically discuss the world and what is happening because they are living in a world where at age 12 they can get on TikTok or Instagram Reels for the first time and learn what a Calvinist is, and their parents don't know what that is.
Right.
They can get on at age 14 and they can look up 20 different Christian artists until they find a song that resonates with them. It might bring them to tears because now they're criers, because now they're pro emotions, they're pro mental health. And I think sometimes it scares the church because the church doesn't know what to do with that. I think most churches are good at one or the other.
Right. As a generation, they're much more holistic in kind of all things.
Yeah.
And so their spirituality is not a Sunday, Wednesday faith. It's not a Sunday. It's
Yeah.
if I'm going to love Jesus, that's going to pour into everything that I'm doing in my life. It's going to reflect in how I'm shopping, how I'm making decisions about who I vote for or where I go or what I buy.
And we want to discuss who we vote for.
And they want to have those
we
conversations
want
and
to
unpack
dialogue,
it.
Yeah. I say that I'm not Gen Z actually, but
I know. With like millennials and Gen Xers all around the table having this
Right.
conversation. But they're way more holistic, and that can be unsettling for those of us who grew up like with a church skill set and a work skill set and a school skill set, and
they just don't want to compartmentalize
they
anymore.
have zero desire to compartmentalize.
Well,
Which
and
is
as like
difficult in the workplace.
well, but as a dad, that gives me all kinds of joy. Like I
Right.
think that's like an incredibly powerful and healthy way of being, and yet it's so radically different than the youth group I grew up with, right?
Absolutely.
You know, in the late '90s and early aughts, it was attractional church. You know, we're going to throw a great party and slap the name of Jesus on it, and disciple 1,000 people this deep, right? Where the invitation is to what I'm hearing, something much deeper and more holistic in the life and breadth of.
And it's freaking the church out because I will even say some of the, and I say healthy tension, healthy conflict, because we should be having these discussions, but some of the healthy tension that I feel as a youth director is the question of, is this the church's job? Because we have students who want to talk about everything from the war in Ukraine to what do we theologically believe about different forms of contraception to the
Plastic water bottles and ethical consumption of
Straws.
yeah.
Yeah.
And gas versus electric vehicles and
fake IDs.
yeah.
Everything under the sun they are bringing to church and wanting to discuss. And I do understand why senior pastors everywhere are struggling with young youth pastors who want to have these discussions because historically it has not been the church's job. Where I've always kind of had my rebuttal, I would measure it similar, is if I am called, put our Methodist hats on, to do all the good I can, how can I not have these conversations?
Right.
And so it's navigating now. The church can't not say things. The church can't really hold the middle anymore either.
And we've historically for a long time held that middle and just said, you know, that's outside of who the church is, that we're gonna serve the world. We're gonna make disciples for the transformation of the world. But that looks like this very defined thing.
There's almost a box to it.
Right. And Gen Z is like, your box is dumb. And we have no interest in that. And so when Nieuwhof talks about revival and retreat, the revival is that they are a more they are more in touch with their spirituality than any generation that is living.
How is my faith part of school? How is my faith part of my college choice? How is my faith part of dating?
Right. And that statistic tells us like it is an increase. It continues to increase. They are more in touch with their spirituality, particularly when we look at the church as younger students. They're engaging that as in their high school years. And becoming more and more active in their spirituality and starting to dig deeper, which is extraordinary. I mean, high five to those of us who are doing youth ministry and are helping them lean into that. But then the retreat part happens when they move through youth group and through college ministry, which are the places that we've siloed
Created
and
for
targeted for them, and releasing them into the church. And they're not being allowed to serve and flourish in the same way.
No.
That because, they're not the big tithers in the church, or they want to do things, they don't care how it's always been done before. They have zero interest. Like, this is the thing that needs to be done. Let's just go do the thing. And the fact that we have to wait for, 2 committees and a board to sign off on those things, they have no interest in waiting. And so when we talk about retreat, it's just that they're finding other places to do the thing. They're not retreating from God. They're not retreating from their spirituality. They're retreating from the institution that is more confining than what they know that God has called them to. And so that's our challenge as the church, is to figure out how can we not restrict them, but equip and empower. We've equipped them.
Sure.
In fact, there's been a trend on TikTok for a while of like, what radicalized you? And almost always it's scripture.
It's always a comment of like, y'all teaching me about Jesus, but then not acting like it.
Yeah, it's y'all teaching me that I was supposed to go out into the world and clothe the naked and heal the sick and feed the hungry, and so I'm going to go do that.
Yeah. What if, and I kind of think it's interesting as we encounter this reality, right? We have formed people to be passionate about mercy and justice and compassion. And I think we have a number of our churches that do that pretty well, right? But we are still an institution that it can sometimes be characterized as being a spider trapped in its own web, right? Stuck in the muck and the mire. What word of advice or encouragement would you offer to churches that have kind of a spirit that would kind of generationally align, right? That are interested in having their faith manifest in compassion and mercy and justice in transformative places, but may have some of the kind of just structures and does that make sense? Like in place.
How do you do it?
Yeah. How do you
How do you help them feel seen?
Yeah.
You know what Loni was mentioning, right? They come through youth group. They come through college ministry. The majority of younger generation ministry is really community oriented. It's really small group based. It's really about helping students to experience something, whether it's means of grace through their relationships that manifest into a love of God. Maybe that's by prevenient grace. Maybe something clicks, But you become an adult and you enter into a church, and then it becomes less community oriented and more worship oriented. And so I wonder so much of it. People assume that Gen Z is pounding out the doors and they're just arrogant know-it-alls and they just want to tell everyone what to do and how to fix themselves and cancel their grandparents. And there's extremes everywhere, of course.
Sure.
But really, it's not that they want to take a seat away from the table. They just want a seat at the table. And I think if a lot of churches could create maybe intergenerational small groups is like the scariest thing in the world for churches. I understand why. I understand the hesitancies. But create spaces where people can dialogue again. Yeah. I think that alone would help people grow leaps and bounds. Because you tell a church committee, hey, there's a bunch of 23-year-olds here who think that we need to go, start this new initiative for one of the local warming shelters. The committee's like, oh, they're getting ahead of themselves. These kids don't understand the costs. They don't know how
the insurance
it is to go late, the liability, they actually might talk to them about it. And that is going to take time, and that is going to get effort. But what is the faith of the next generation worth to you? It should be everything.
Yeah. And when we talk about giving them a seat at the table, that also means in positions of authority. Like we talked about this the last time we did a podcast together, that we confirm kids generally sometime between 6th and 8th grade.
Right.
And from that moment on, they are full members of the community, just like the rest of us, which means they get a seat at the table if we provide one. And so
no one tells them they do.
No one tells them. In fact, we keep them like, sequestered in the basement or in another building.
Or you look at annual conference. People assume like, well, we don't want to take a student because they're not going to read up on it. You don't know that.
You don't know that. My kids, so our annual conference, well, our committee, our group that goes from our church, has 2 teenagers on our annual conference crew, on our lay committee. And they changed the game because they did way more deep dive reading than anybody else. But make sure, if you have a one board model, make sure there's at least 1 and maybe 2 people that are in that generation on your one board. Make sure there's kids and college students and 25-year-olds invited into those spaces. If your decision-making process is happening behind closed doors, as a general rule, our churches historically, those closed door people have been in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Sure. That's just what those committees look like. Yep. And that is to our detriment. And we can look at, they have the institutional knowledge or the experience and the life experience. But they might also be missing some vision. Or some creativity. No one knows how to do things for less money better than people who are poor and are in their first jobs and first careers. They can do things more creatively with way less funds than we've ever thought about doing.
And they can rally their friends.
And they can rally their friends, and they have the energy to do it. And so not just with small groups, but with our governing authorities, we need to make sure that they have space and are invited. When we talk about representation matters, if you are a young adult and you know that there's an 18-year-old on the board at this church or a 23-year-old that's on SPRC, then you feel like your voice is heard automatically more than it might, if it's all people who look like your grandparents.
And I think the church needs to be on red alert here, and the church just isn't. Mac Nolan, our high school pastor, recently told me she read somewhere, I think this is the correct percentage, it's in the 40s though, like 46% of United Methodist churches do not have someone at all between the ages of 0 and 18.
Woo!
46.
That statistic is staggering and also doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. We are on red alert. These are not just conversations to have for fun anymore. If you are not deeply engaging with the rising generations, with young people, your church is gonna die. It's gonna die. And there's people who could nitpick that statement and be like, well, what about money and fees and we don't want to rush people out the door? It doesn't matter anymore.
It doesn't matter anymore. And if you are a church that doesn't have anybody between the ages of 0 and 18, then be pouring into your 20-year-olds.
Well, and if you don't have, and be pouring into your local elementary school, your local middle school, local high school. They don't have to darken your door for you, Christ to have called you to love them.
To love
Hold
them.
a VBS, even if you have no kids, and go put flyers out on every door in the city.
Yeah.
40s. I'm sorry, I'm stuck on 46%. You've blown my mind.
I know somebody can fact check me, and that's great.
The fact that it's anywhere close to 46% is the thing that should smack us upside the head
It should be. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And again, as Melanie and I keep trying to say, it's not because they're giving up on God.
No.
They're not giving up on Jesus. I think Christianity Today just posted an article about how there's actually a resurgence towards the faith once again, but not towards church.
Yeah.
So that's the issue here. In these closed doors meetings, this fear to be upfront and vulnerable about even the issues in your church are not acceptable anymore.
Gen Z knows they're called, and they're unapologetic in that. And they're unapologetic with living out their faith. And so if they're being told no or wait or stop or that's not the way we do things, then they might smile and nod at us, and they're just going to find another way to go and serve. They're going to find other resources that allow them to do the thing that they know they're called to do. And so it's not that they're stepping away from their faith. They're just living life big like Jesus told them to live. And so that doesn't always fit in the nice, neat little boxes the church has built for them.
Last week on the podcast, Billy Echtels-Richter invited told the story of how Grace Avenue over the last 25 years has been a wholly different church every 3 years, right? Just the seasons of life that they've gone through. And so many churches, change is the word that we try to avoid at all possible costs, right? And yet thriving and change go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Right? And as we're talking, it's striking me how much those of us who are on the more institutional side of things, right? Because frankly, I love my Pod Strangely Warm family, but we are a bunch of graying Methodist nerds that watch this, okay? And we've got to be open to holding loosely the things that have been deeply formative and mattering to us so that others might hold on to.
Yeah, I learned more hanging out with teenagers and with the college students at the UTA Wesley, and we have a pastor on staff who's 26, and a kids minister who's 25, and getting to experience life with them and picking their brains and letting them challenge me and my faith and my ministry, and has shifted how good I am at my job. It's challenged me to step up in ways that are unexpected. There are lots of ways that I get to mentor and pour into them, but there's a whole lot of ways that they are challenging and supporting and pushing back on me in a way that's really healthy and organic. And it's making me stronger in my faith, but also better at doing this Jesus thing all the time. Right? Just hanging out and learning from them. Just reading scripture in ways that they are doing deep dives in things that I have just taken for granted my entire life. And part of you wants to be like, but we don't talk about that part. We just did Ash Wednesday, and lots of the scriptures from Isaiah and Joel are all about Israel crying out and saying, but God, we're so religious. And God is like, I am not at all interested in your religious nonsense. I told you to, do justice and love mercy, and you have failed in that. And so, apocalyptic nonsense. And Gen Z looks at those passages of scripture and is like, see?
Yeah.
And we look at them and think, but we only read those on Ash Wednesday. And
when we need to remember that we are mortal.
When we need to remember that we are mortal, and we have,
we're going to die.
We are going to die.
It makes me think, I got to speak to our UMW chapter recently. And, one of the things we kept reiterating to them was, as they're healing relationships, whether it's with kids or grandkids, was to not always offer advice. And so I kind of closed it out towards the end, and I was like, look, I know that many of you are sitting in this room here thinking, but I have so much to offer, and you do. But when you build that relationship first, then they're going to want your advice. In fact, they'll seek advice. This notion that Gen Z just is arrogant, know-it-alls, again, there's extremes in every generation.
Sure.
Right.
And there's jerks in every generation.
Yes, but they just want trust.
Yeah.
They are so skeptical about who they trust. And so, the church does need to be on alert and call out moral failures. The church needs to be on alert and open up church council meetings. They are watching, and they're honestly looking for any reason not to trust you. But when they do trust you, not only are they emboldened for whatever advice you're willing to offer them that they will receive, but they're also emboldened for you. And for the pastors in the pulpit who are nervous about their Gen Z or think they're going to push too far or scare off other congregants, I would just say, if you can gain their trust, they will go to war for you.
Yeah, if they see authenticity in you, they will champion you forever.
Forever. They just live in a world where they have experienced so little authenticity because of social media, because of all of the classic Gen Z examples, that to see people living authentically and to living authentically into their faith is, for all of us, right? It draws us near because that is our own image of God reflecting outside.
And it's the thing that we have grown up saying to each other that we want for each other, right? That we're living authentically, that I'm going to be the same person at work and school and home.
Right.
And that's hard. And continues to be hard.
But it's holy.
And that's what sanctification looks like.
Right.
And Gen Z isn't going to compromise on that. So if they recognize that you're a different person when they saw you at the bank you work at than you are in the pew on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
You've been written off.
You've been written off. And at the very least, they're going to have questions. And
or
we
you're a
need to
different
be
person in person than your social profile would indicate.
Than your social profile indicates.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
And they can tell. They can read someone's profile and know if it's
And
genuine
they
or not.
have
Like
done,
that.
if a Gen Z has invested any energy in you at all, they have done a deep dive in your social media. They have gone back. We have a new pastor coming, and
We will get likes from kids on
from
Facebook
posts
photo. I'm like, how did you
3
even
or
get on
4
Facebook?
years ago. We have a new pastor coming, and our youth group was sitting in Sunday school one morning, and I'm teaching a Sunday school lesson and thinking it's going really extraordinary, and they're like, "Hey, our new guy's an Enneagram 3," and I'm like, "You guys have got to stop doing a deep dive of what the Enneagram test that he took in 2019."
When we hired a new high school pastor, it was, I found her blog from 4 years ago. How? I was Googling her too. My goodness.
So they will do a deep dive and make sure, you don't have to be the same person that you were in 2019. Hopefully you're not. But is there growth?
Yeah.
Is it consistent?
Yeah.
Have you changed who you are? They're clocking all those things. And they are clocking them for themselves too. It's not that they're judgy of all other generations and not a little self-aware. They're champions for change, and they're champions for good. And when we can harness and empower and equip that, it's excellent. And when it feels like it's targeted against us, it's hard.
Yeah.
And that's what I think people aren't liking
And
about
people,
them. Because we talk about the retreat, we talk about their high expectations, and people are very quick to be like, well, it's not fair. They're so black and white. People make mistakes.
they haven't paid their dues.
Yes,
They don't know the reason things happen the way
And
they do.
it's so frustrating in the church because it's always, well, we need to forgive them, and Gen Z doesn't understand. And is it really bad that they're holding us more accountable?
Right?
I just don't think it is.
I don't think it is either.
I literally last night, it was Ash Wednesday, and I was sitting with a leader who was a former student, who now is a 25-year-old woman. I remember when she was 14. And she made the comment, she was like, yeah, you've kind of been the same. And I was like, that's kind of the goal, that I'm the same in my personal life and here. And that it's not this juxtaposition every time. And if it is, then we should have some concerns. And I think before, it's not that all of the pastors were having these double lives. I don't believe that.
Right.
We all have great colleagues who we respect. But I think pastors are intimidated because the safety net of extra grace is no longer there.
It's no longer there.
Okay.
And so you should have already been doing the right thing.
Sure.
Or the safety net of being performative, right?
Yeah.
Acting like we're acting into our holiness.
Yeah.
And they have zero tolerance for
They're
that.
going to call you out.
Yeah.
I mean, they will tell you, right? If they find out that there is some pastor who screams at their kid at home and that kid complains about it at school, they're going to clock it.
Yeah.
When you're sitting in a sermon talking about conflict, they're going to clock it. Be like, you don't do that for your own kid.
Yeah.
And now they've tuned you out.
Okay.
I've been doing youth ministry for 20 years. God, that's hard. 20-ish years. And so that's millennials and Gen Z. And now Gen Alpha is most of our junior high. And
Which they are fascinating.
Gen Alpha, we are not ready.
We're not, yeah. They're changing the game. They are weird to me.
They are feral and a little rabid and have no boundaries.
I am relearning youth ministry again.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We should come and do a podcast
Let's
about
do
that.
another one on
Yeah.
that. And
Bring
I
us
may
back.
pick your brains when we get done because all my kids, the oldest is in 8th grade, and I'm
Yeah,
it's an
you're
interesting
living in Gen Alpha
season
zone.
to wrap my head around.
But I have more kids that are experiencing a call to ministry in their college and young adult years right now than I ever have in my 20 years of ministry. Normally it'll be 1 or 2 every other year. Right now I had last fall, I had 3 college kids that came to me and were like, I think God's calling me to go to seminary. And that's extra. So they are called to be a part of this. We have to not put out that fire.
Yeah. Well, and if we're going to be good ancestors, that's the language the bishop has used again and again and again. How are we good ancestors for those that we're going to hand the church off to? If it's as simple as not putting out the fire,
Right?
sometimes we want this to be some big elaborate system that's hard in so many different ways, and sometimes it involves checking our ego. Sometimes it involves a call to greater accountability ourselves, right, and continuity between kind of what we hold and what we believe and how we live. But if it's as simple as not putting out the fire and being more like Jesus ourselves,
Giving him a seat.
and giving him a seat, that's
We have to be
that's infinitely doable, whether our church has one kid under 18 or 0, and then we're working toward it, or 472.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to be prepared that they may not be setting the fires in the fireplaces and the fire pits, though. They may just be setting the things on fire that need to be set on fire.
And I think that's scary,
And
right?
it's a scary place to be.
Sure.
Again, and that is where you have a relationship with them to have those conversations on why. I think of right now, I have a fundraiser that is 35 years old. We do it every year. And quite honestly, it's not really working anymore. But was I willing to listen to leadership and seniors at our church about why we should try one more year? I was. I still don't think it's the future, but I was willing to listen to them.
Yeah.
And so that's because we have that relational capital to where I'm not just going to be the young and hungry youth director who's like, cut it. It doesn't work. This is dumb. And so can Gen Z, right? Because I think it's a dual conversation on how everyone needs to grow. They are still growing. One of our youth ministry values is we support and love a kid where they are now, and we champion who they're still becoming. Because a teenager is different every 3 months.
Yeah.
Gen Z is not all teenagers, as we said. They're in the workforce. I oversee several Gen Z pastors, and they're very different than even the millennials who are in my age of like being in your 30s. There is a stark difference. But if there is relationship, they're willing to listen just like anyone else. So we can't write them off, and we can honor what they're bringing and their concerns while also still honoring maybe what the church is curious or wanting to protect. Like what is that why? Because I think there are things that the church wants to protect, and there's reason for that. But do you actually know your why?
Yeah.
Is it to keep that one congregant happy?
Right.
Is it because you've done it for centuries and it helps you understand the culture of your church? What is the why? Maybe do reflecting on that will be helpful, I think, for future generations.
It's really good. As we wrap up, is there one thing you would say to churches, whether they find themselves in the 46% that don't have anybody under age 18 among our United Methodist churches, or the 54% that have some number of folks who are in Gen Alpha and Gen Z seeking to be good ancestors and disciple well the next generation while they're continuing to be discipled themselves? If you have one kind of parting shot or parting nugget that you would offer to these good and faithful church folks who are trying their best and sometimes getting in their own way, because we all do, as they wrestle with this reality of revival and retreat happening at the same time.
Give your young people a seat at the table. They're what they lack in resources, they make up for in passion and energy and ingenuity. And so if you are feeling like your church is flailing in some places, I promise they've thought it through, or they're willing to think it through. And I think so much of the time we look at mentorship as like, I am older and so I am pouring into you, or discipleship is I am older and wiser and I am pouring into you. And mentorship and discipleship are two-way streets. You're learning and sharpening and sanctifying together. And so lean into that. But make sure that they're in the spaces where decisions are being made. Make sure that you're creating community where they are a part of your community, not just the tokens that are sitting on the outside that are cute when they come and perform, and then we send them back to the basement until the next time we need them to come out.
Okay. Seat at the table.
Seat at the table. It's critical for all of us to feel seen and heard and represented is
and can
vital.
I say and voice in the process?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mine almost is like the next step from that seat at the table, and mine is it's okay if they fail.
Absolutely.
You know, if they want to change how VBS has always been done and they write their own curriculum, you don't buy the little cute package online or off Etsy, however you're doing it, let them.
Yeah.
They're going to learn from it. Or if they think, you know, they want to try this weird song that is so bizarre to you, but they think it's going to help in Ash Wednesday or Maundy Thursday, and you're like, this is really weird, let them. You might be surprised when they succeed. There have been times with my staff where I thought, this is an insane idea, but you know what? You need to do your own pastoral journey. I had plenty of failures along the way, and they were right. And I get to be humbled and pleasantly surprised and see growth come from that. So I think sometimes churches get so bent out of shape of like, this isn't going to work. Why would they try? Let them. Let them.
Even in the times that you have to course correct, I have learned and they have learned from those moments. Oh. It's okay to hold them. They want you to hold them accountable because they're holding you accountable.
Yeah.
So set expectations, but also lean into the openness. Approach it with an open hand, and let them do the thing. Yeah. They're so creative and so called.
And letting them just make those decisions and learn from them it's just imperative, you know? Like, I think in most of the Gen Z complaints, you're always going to get some about worship and then that you're not serving enough. Maybe in your opinion as a senior pastor, whoever's listening to this, you are. Try it their way once and see. They might be wrong, but you're going to get so much more buy-in because you tried the song, because you tried to add the extra service project that maybe really no one did have time for. But you might be wrong.
Right.
And maybe what they think about worship in your sanctuary is the move. Maybe adding that service project. They're like, no one has time for this, I know, but the Gen Z are all riled up because of tech. Just see.
Just try it.
Just try it.
Amen. Just try it. Chelsea, thank you so much. Lonnie, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And thank you for joining us today on Pod Strangely Warmed. We hope and pray that this has been a meaningful conversation for you and that as we seek to be good ancestors for those who come after us, we will create space at the table for all the voices, including our Gen Z and emerging Gen Alpha folks, as well as giving people room to fail. I bet if you reflect on your life, there are plenty of times where people gave you a crown to grow into, as Howard Thurman was known to say. That space to fail, but fail forward. So until next time, I'm Daniel Hawkins, and this is Pod Strangely Warmed. This has been Pod Strangely Warmed. If you enjoyed our conversation today, know that you can find us anywhere you find podcasts. On Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, any and all the places, we are there. So if you want to continue the good United Methodist conversation that you've been a part of today, find us, like us, rate us, review us, and share with a friend so that the good news that is happening right here in our own midst can amplify even more.
Gen Alpha, that is a whole new ballgame.
I mean,
they had COVID during really key.
really formative years.
Yeah, developmental years. So they are bouncing off the walls.
Yeah. They were in elementary school
Yeah.
for COVID.
But I'm not convincing a kid to like care about God and faith. Whereas Gen Z, they're like, let me see if this is real. You know? Whereas like
Gen Alpha is like, well, duh.
literally, it's so fascinating.
Interesting.